So yesterday in Newswave, we talked a bit about Google Stadia and the announcement that it would be shutting down to start off 2023. And since then, over the last 24 hours, more and more information has come out around this closure, and it just seems like the Google Stadia situation has actually gotten worse. And in fact, it's to the point now where it's astounding some of the decisions that were made throughout Google Stadia's life and some of the stuff they've pulled with this latest announcement the store will be closing in January. We're going to go over that here today. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button. Helps out a ton. And if you're new here to the Spawnwave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. First off, let's head over here. This is on the Google Stadia store. Let's see how things look currently after that announcement. And just on the homepage, looks pretty standard. Have the library there, captures, game stats, and you can claim your 50-plus games at no extra cost for the pro membership. But as people pointed out online, and I had to see for myself, if you go to the store, it's just gone. I have to assume as soon as they pushed that press release and the announcement, they flipped the switch and just knocked out the store completely. The store really doesn't have any purpose at all now, since they are not selling games any longer, and I guess they figured, hey, we're just gonna get rid of this store now so no one tries to buy anything, nothing like that. However, I guess if you wanted to just take a look through the store before it disappeared, you really weren't given any warning, and it's not possible to do so now. I had mentioned that there were some odd decisions that were made throughout the entirety of Google Stadia's life, from the launch to now it closing. One example we have here is that Google reportedly paid $20 million for Ubisoft ports on Stadia, and Take-Two got tens of millions of dollars for Red Dead Redemption 2 and NBA 2K. Now, if you remember, Ubisoft had Assassin's Creed and The Division, and apparently that was $20 million, according to Jason Schreier. To go a bit further, it sounds like they weren't willing to pay out a bunch of money for indie titles. So in that case, some indie titles kind of passed on this because they just weren't paid enough to cover their development costs. There was one thing that's come out pretty recently. I had heard somewhat about this, and it has to do with Hideo Kojima and a project he had planned for Stadia. This is over on 9 to 5 Google, where they say a source says that the game Kojima was working on was meant to be a Stadia exclusive follow-up to Death Stranding, a game which initially launched as a PlayStation exclusive in 2019. There were some multiplayer elements to it, as they say, asynchronous, to where things you do in your game would change and alter other people's games, and a lot of times would benefit, and you all sort of work together indirectly to build out this new world and kind of transport things easier. You build highways and stuff. It's a pretty cool idea, and that's the strand system, as Kojima calls it. But in this case, it's going more for a single player experience, but he still wanted to do some stuff with cloud computing, which is the idea of Google Stadia. If you remember, when they first talked about Google Stadia, they mentioned there would be games that would only be possible through the power of the cloud. You bring in Hideo Kojima with all kinds of weird ideas for it, right? Well, they say that, according to their source, it was the single-player nature of the game that led Google to cancel Stadia's collaboration with Kojima, with the company believing there was no longer a market for solo experiences. The game had gotten initial approval from Google and had begun the early stages of development. However, shortly after the first mock-ups were shown in mid-2020, Google scrapped the project entirely, and apparently it was Phil Harrison who made the final call to cancel the Death Stranding follow-up, which, wow, Phil Harrison, just Microsoft, Sony, Google, can't seem to launch a system or platform anywhere. Now, a follow-up to Death Stranding could be a spiritual successor or a game that kind of exists in the same universe. Think of how Remedy is tying some of their games together, Alan Wake, Control, and stuff, and they're sort of alluding back and forth to each property in those games. Kind of the same here. I don't think it would have been called Death Stranding 2 or anything like that, but I'm sure Kojima could have done some things to sort of tie all of it together. And I think he's still going to do that because it appears this project, based on several rumors and reports, is what he's now moved over and working on with Microsoft using their cloud system, Azure. It sort of falls back in line with Google just being unsure as to how to approach gaming or really develop a platform with interesting and exclusive content. They had internal studios that they seemed to create as they were launching the platform, which, as we've seen with game development now, specifically for those big AAA games that are really designed to bring people into the platforms from first-party studios, it was going to take way more time than I think they were. I feel like Google showed up and was like, oh, this will take, I don't know, maybe 2 years to get a game done. No, when you bring like Jade Raymond on and some of the talent, they're thinking they're going to have a much longer runway, and it just seems like Google wasn't ready to take that long for Stadia to get up and running to a position where they were comfortable with it. But the crazy thing with Google Stadia is it seems like there was no communication at all that it was shutting down. While from the outside, most of us were looking at this saying, okay, I don't think Google Stadia is going to be going on much longer. I'm sure there were developers and publishers who were sort of thinking that Google would just keep up the storefront and the service itself, even if they weren't going to be developing specifically for Stadia. In fact, a day ago, it got a UI update right here, which was noticed on the subreddit, and people got really excited. And then the Stadia Stadia community manager came in and said, yeah, we have this new UI update. It'll be rolling out over the next week. And then 24 hours later, they announced that Google Stadia was going to be shutting down. And in fact, it appears developers were completely blindsided by this announcement. We can see here from Game Revolution, Google Stadia shuts down, but developers weren't given warning. And there are many instances of this over the last 24 hours with developers speaking out, saying this from Brandon. I know everybody is having a great time laughing at this, but Stadia had the best dev revenue of any streaming service, and launching Hyper Gun Sport there was going to recoup our dev costs. We were launching there in November and are now in a much tougher situation. You have CoachSync saying, we're so sad to hear this news. At this time, we are unsure how this impacts our titles, and we'll, of course, keep everyone updated when we have more information. In the meantime, we wish everyone impacted by this news the best. And they had been kind of alluding to October 1st, not necessarily like, oh, Google Stadia is shutting down, more like, oh, we have more information on some of the games and stuff we're working on here, which we can see this from Wire Productions. Something happened after we tweeted this, that being not long until October 1st. Probably going to be a good day. So that, yeah, didn't age well for that one. But it just goes to show you with some of the decision-making, the process that was going on behind the scenes at Google, the knee-jerk reactions to make some of these decisions, not great when it comes to developer relations. And the thing that everyone's pointing out is it's pretty clear Google has been working to wind down Stadia, or at least planning out their exit strategy for, at bare minimum, a couple of months, because a rumor got out there, and I believe it was from Killed by Google, a Twitter account, that mentioned, hey, they're winding this stuff down. There are plans in motion. This was 2 months ago. And in fact, Google Stadia's Twitter account decided to respond, and we can see it says Stadia is not shutting down. Rest assured, we're always working on bringing more great games to the platform and Stadia Pro. Let us know if you have other questions. This is mostly because people were asking Google Stadia, the Twitter account, about that report. And in fact, Stadia, the Twitter account, went on to continue like making fun of the report and doing other things, pushing back. And 2 months later, here we are now with Google Stadia shutting down. Now, that's the social media manager who, like, let's face it, they're probably not getting told all of the internal secrets at Google. But even some developers within Google are saying that they didn't know that this was going to happen, and this was blindsiding them as well. Some even larger partners like Destiny, as an example, Destiny 2, probably one of the most popular games on Stadia, maybe next to Cyberpunk 2077. Well, take a look at what they had to say on Twitter. We just learned about Stadia shutting down and have begun conversations about next steps for our players. We will announce and send out information regarding Destiny 2 Stadia accounts once we have a plan of action. And this is something I'm seeing more and more pop up because your save files are stuck on Stadia. You can back up your save files apparently locally to your PC, but that doesn't mean that they are compatible with a local version of the game, say, on Steam. And it seems like several of the developers who were on Stadia are trying to figure this out now. Saw IO Interactive mention their Hitman stuff with the save. Ubisoft mentioned the same thing, where they're trying to figure out ways to get people's save games and ownership of these titles off of Stadia if they want to continue playing on other platforms like, say, on Steam, or I guess for Ubisoft, their own launcher. I did see one possible solution that was brought up by Steven Totillo, who had some more reporting on this with developers. One, for example, with a planned Stadia game, says their Stadia rep has floated reimbursement payment to the studio. And that's really how Google, I think, is trying to find their way out of this. Just refund as many people as possible and move along from it. I think with Stadia, as the writing became more and more clear on the wall, Google wanted to just basically prove that it was a platform that could work for other publishers who could actually make games. I think after Cyberpunk 2077, I believe they had mentioned this, was such a success for them because, well, it was broken on almost every other platform, but Stadia held up pretty well, and it was a good experience. No one's really doubted Stadia's technology when it comes to game streaming, just Google's ability to run it. And yesterday I had brought up the idea that maybe the closure of Stadia would shake some confidence in the industry when it comes to a cloud gaming future, where all we do is rely on cloud gaming. We don't have local systems or boxes that we put under our TV or hybrid systems like the Switch, and we just game specifically through servers. But Google's incompetence is making a pretty good counter argument to all of that, hey, if they were just better at running the platform, if they kept the Kojima deal on the table, if they had a longer runway, and maybe if they didn't rush the service to market, say had a couple of exclusive games ready to go at launch that displayed what the cloud could do, it would still be around and thriving currently. It's not the cloud technology or the idea that's the problem. It's Google's ability to run a gaming platform that's the problem. And I'll admit it's kind of hard to push back on that with some of the incompetence, some overwhelming at time that's been displayed here by Google from start to now finish here in January for the Stadia platform. But let me know what you guys think about all of this down below. I'm curious if more information comes out here. I'm really interested to see if some of these developers come up with ways to get not only your ownership of your title off of there, but even your save files. That is probably the most important thing to people, especially in games like Destiny 2 and Cyberpunk 2077, with that expansion coming up next year for the game. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.